Welcome to this THWAC Camp session on Optimizing Orion. I'm Thomas LaRock.
And I'm Destiny Bertucci, and we're going to help you to understand how to optimize your SolarWinds installation of the Orion platform.
That's right. We will talk about some of the Orion configuration options you may not know about, such as how to troubleshoot resource capacity limits, how to decide when it's time to scale up or scale out, and how to review your maintenance tasks, and that will include both the database and Orion itself.
And when we are done here, you should have all the information that you need to keep your Orion installs running at peak performance.
And just the word optimization can give some people the shivers. And our goal here today is to make sure you get the knowledge that you need so you can tackle those performance issues with confidence.
Better yet, we want to give you the necessary skills to avoid even having the issues in the first place.
Right, because the best problem is one that you never even have to face to begin with. So we want to help you be proactive so you can reduce the amount of time that you spend being reactive and fighting those fires. Where should we begin?
Well, let's start with the basics. So reviewing the Orion configuration options, that can impact performance the most. Options such as the default polling interval, use of agents, default syslog options are great examples of the choices that are being made currently with the Orion administrators that may result in less than desirable performance.
And it's a long list, and we have a published checklist for some of these things, and you can review that in order to see just how long of a list it is. But today we're going to focus on just those few that we feel are the important options for you to look at.
Well, and then there's the 80-20 rule. And for our needs here, the 80-20 rule says that 80% of performance problems comes from 20% of your configuration options. That's why we are going to only look at a handful.
Right, and of course, as a data guy, that makes complete sense to me. So which one should we start with?
All right, well, let's start with the default polling options.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we want to go into the default polling settings. So I'm going to go into my settings at the top, all settings, and then we're going to come across here and scroll down a little bit so that we can see the polling settings itself.
There they are.
So once you click onto this, it's going to open up kind of a plethora of knowledge for you. So in case you haven't seen this, we're just going to try to go through this a little bit and kind of explain what these are.
Okay.
So the polling intervals, these are default, these are out of the box. So if you've never done anything, this is what yours is going to look like. 120 seconds poll interval for your nodes, your interfaces, and your volumes. Your rediscovery is 30 minutes, and your asset inventory is every day. Now, to put this into a better way to look at this as well is that when you're looking at the seconds that are coming across at the 120, those are ping times. So that's your up-down statuses, things like that. Your rediscovery is actually going to be an SNMP poll that's going to go out there. So that's going to be like if you're going to do a rediscovery, so like your SAM components, things like that can be updated because a lot of the times you have those set up at a little bit of a different time. When we have the statistic pollings, that's SNMP, so that's your 10-minute settings that you have there. Your topology, that's going to be the topology of your layer 3 that you can click on there that goes through there that's going to look at it. You can look at your statistical information for your node statistics, your interface volumes, your data obsolete after polls. Now this is the ones that when you look through here, you can change around because these are the ones that are going to have the most effect on the devices. So if you have older devices with SNMP that are getting polled, sometimes they don't like to be polled at 10 minutes. Sometimes industry standard-wise, they don't change. So like there is some devices that are out there that they have a rolling of five-minute data actual updates, right? It's kind of pointless to poll them every 120 seconds or 60, but a lot of people try to get that real-time polling, so they'll come in here and make these changes, and then they wonder why their performance is hit. Right? Because they're like, well, I want instant gratification, right? Like I want to know instantly what's going on. So if you're going to do that, the ICMP polls on the top part of the polling intervals, you can manipulate those around. What we need to start looking at is your CPU and your memory of how your devices of your Polar and your Orion main are actually functioning from there. Now, if you're monitoring that with your SolarWinds, you're going to have that data there. So you have a great baseline that's going to be across there. I always say at least make sure that you have the industry standards out of the box for at least 7 days. You want to have that baseline and know how the devices is doing, because if you need to make a change, it's better to do it at the beginning of your installation than it is to try to skew your data later, right? So when we look at the SNMP polling, when you start changing these down, that's going to increase, it's going to decrease, your actual performance. But if you have performance issues, you can increase the time of SNMP if it's not something of which that you need, and then that helps you to not have so many updates to the database. That helps you also on your CPU as well as your memory. Now, when we start looking at the database settings down here, this is where you can start to change timeouts and try to do things across there that can also help you out. We're going to discuss this in a different demo, but I at least want to kind of go through the polling settings as they are.
But these database settings, because this is kind of misleading, because they're inside of a thing called polling settings.
Boy, that only makes sense.
It makes sense that, you're right, everybody that's been using the product for decades, but this is where you find a lot of information about basic database maintenance tasks. It's actually located inside the admin settings for the polling.
Right, and that's always a great place to look, because especially if you've been with SolarWinds for a long time and had the Orion platform, because it used to be in a different location of itself. So now that if you can notice changes that you can manipulate that it can affect your performance, or for good or bad, those are in the polling settings, because technically it's the pollings and the things that are going out there and the queries that are being done on the backside. So when you can also go down here, we can see that the network, we have timeouts for here. Now this ICMP data, this is key too, because this allows you to have the weight behind the ICMP of what's going on there. Some devices need an X amount of characters to have a different kind of a kilobyte, kind of a deal that will go across it. Some devices do not like it, so you can actually turn it down a little bit. Right. This is global. So like when you make this change, that's something to think about, because it's going to be a global change that comes across there. So you don't want to like skew the data or to come across. Your SNMP timeout, this is global change too, right? So, but this is one of those things that you have to think about. If you have a WAN connection, you have something that's long distance, that takes a little bit more time. Hopefully it doesn't take that much time that comes across there, but sometimes it can, especially depending upon the media of which it's traveling through. So you need to be kind of self-aware of your network and your infrastructure of which that you're monitoring. Now, when we talk about performance and optimizing Orion, we really have to think about how do we have it set up. And as I said a while ago, when you have those baselines, those are the best ways to actually gather the information that comes across. Because when you have that baseline, you're able to see any uptick, or when you're adding nodes, you're able to see how it's affecting the health of the actual Orion platform, which is great information for you to use. It's hard to implement monitoring after a situation has happened. So that's why I always say, please start off, give it 7 days so that you have kind of an accurate data point, and then start adding in and kind of manipulating some of the things of which that you're wanting to do. Now, when we're talking about the calculations and thresholds, we can see that we can change warning levels. You can change some of the things that are helping on the backside. You can change your hardware health, which those are like, what's the temperature, things like that that's on with your devices. All of that is helpful. Now let's talk about when you're talking from SNMP, which we're adjusting here, to an agent. Why would you think that people would want to put an agent on a device to poll versus just using SNMP or WMI?
Well, I mean, the difference between push versus pull, or the idea that it could be behind a firewall. Maybe you just want to collect information and you push it out at a predefined interval.
Definitely. So within the products now, we have Linux and we also have Windows agents of which that you can use, so that you have that push-pull options of which that you can come across. That helps you to gather the data so that you can be sent back towards us. Now for firewalls and security-wise, it's a lot easier for me to control an agent that needs access back to somewhere versus I need a whole subnet to be allowed within devices. And so that's something that you need to think about performance-wise, because sometimes when we have agents and we're like trying to slow down, we need to look at the QoS that we may have on the network, because we have to make sure that we are allowing the traffic to come through. And a lot of times that can affect your performance as well, because it's trying to send through and your devices are holding it up, not necessarily your monitoring.
That always seems to be a point of contention for some people, agent or not. Is my tool, it's agentless. And for some people that sounds really great, and other people, no, I actually would prefer to have agents.
Well, and see, and with Linux, you have so many different flavors of it, right? And so it's hard with NetSNMP to know the accurate data of which that you're getting from the OIDs when you're trying to pull them. So by having an agent, that alleviates that problem, and you don't have to keep up with the different NetSNMPs. So if you're doing compliance reports, well, that's a lot less that you have to keep up with as well. So in the greater scheme of things, it's easier to have the agent on there. But what I always like to tell everybody is, because I've done databases in the MIB database for a long time, is SNMP is not agentless necessarily, right? I mean, there is a weight pack of which that comes across there, so does WMI. It's just what is the one that's going to be the easiest for you to manage, and what is the one that's going to work within your team for the performance you need. If people don't understand WMI, you may not want to implement that because it may be a hindrance. And we've also seen more service accounts where people will try to implement service accounts and they have a rolling change. So it's like every 45 minutes to or 45 days to 90 days, they want to change the passwords, and then they wonder why they have all the alerts out. Well, there's a difference in service accounts. So those performance issues and having a true baseline makes a big difference. Now, when we want to talk about logging can affect greatly. So what I wanted to talk about was actual syslogs. So when you see syslogs that come through there, you can have trillions of hits with syslogs or traps. Syslogs, I see the most of it that affect people because all of a sudden they will just, gear up and they'll turn all their syslogs on because they're wanting security for tracking. And the next thing you know, their database is just huge, out of control, and they don't understand what's going on. You need to be able to perform the actual task of how much do you need to save the data for? Like, how many days do you need? Is it, a year? Is it 30 days? Is it 5 years? What is your security policy of which that you have behind there? Now, what I also like to do is use a filter. So if you have like the Orion Log Manager, you have things like that are out there, that can filter through a lot of the things which that you need, and then you can send out to your monitoring tools so that you have like a centralized place for your logs, and then you're able to retrieve and alert upon them within there.
Right.
The best thing that I like though is that you can drop off things that you don't need. Now here's an interesting conversation. So I have seen it to where we have filtered from the actual platform itself, where we're like, drop these, we don't need this syslog, these are informational, don't need these.
Okay.
That's one way to address it. I've also seen it to where people take it to the next level and then they're from the device only send X amount of information to come across there. Okay. Now, if you are going to do that, you can use the Network Configuration Manager, obviously, to send out the push to make the updates that you can do that. But I would rather hold all of those messages in and filter them from another platform that's still saving them, so you can have that actual saved information. So if there is an issue, you have them. You cannot get them if they're not receiving.
That's right.
So that's something that I always like to say. And so when we're talking about the logging and the events of which that we need to come through, the major things that I like to tell people is centralized logging. You need to have a dedicated time frame of which that you need to hold them for, and you need to check with your policies because that's what's going to determine the settings from that polling.
That's great. So now we've looked at some configuration options. Let's look at something near and dear to my heart, resource constraints.
Yeah, here's a common question. Do we need more memory?
Or disk, or CPU,
well, we
or
all
network?
know we need more bandwidth.
Yeah. But for our customers, it's important for them to know what the problem isn't just as much as knowing what the problem is. So that's why I like to take SAM and DPA and use them together. It's pointing to an instance where SolarWinds products are already installed.
So you're using SolarWinds products to help make other SolarWinds products better.
Yes, I call it SolarWinds Inception.
Okay, so what does this look like?
Well, let's take a look.
Okay.
So what I have here is I have DPA that's pointed at an instance of SQL Server that happens to be hosting some Orion installs. So all of these queries here are Orion queries of varying things that we've been testing. You can see in DPA, we measure things, everything you'll see is an aggregate. So what you see here is the total amount of executions for this particular query, which is selecting, it looks like an endpoint address. And that executed 330,000 times over the course of the entire day, which was July 3rd. So the question always becomes, is 330,000 executions, is that normal? Do you have any idea?
Well, I have no idea. Is there a baseline? Because it looks like it's jotted up.
Right. That is the aggregate showing you that query had the most amount of weight for that particular day. So when you look at the time slices and you look at the bars, you always have to think aggregates, right? So in this case, this is the biggest bar. I just happened to hover over to give you an idea of what it looks like. I'm going to actually look at a little bit over here. Do you recognize that guy? Update.
Yes.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
Happens all the time.
Literally.
Look at that. 2 million executions of this particular query. Now, is that a lot? I don't know, actually. We're going to find out. More importantly is, notice how fast they are.
Yeah, pretty fast.
Pretty fast, right? 2 milliseconds on average each time. If a query is running in 2 milliseconds, how fast do you think you can make it run? What's going to be the performance improvement you can make on a 2 millisecond query, right?
It's kind of like, what's the speed of light?
Right. So right now, I'm looking at this. If somebody was to come to me and say, we're having trouble with the Orion install, now naturally the questions become, do we need more CPU, memory, disk, network? But when I look at this, I can tell you, well, 2 million executions on average in 2 milliseconds, I don't think there's a problem necessarily with the Orion installation. Now what we can do here is a couple of things. I'll click on the 24th, and that'll give me a midnight to midnight view of that particular day. You see something odd obviously stands out. This is one of the things I love about DPA is the visualization. Like right away, well, what was different? Oh, it's running a CheckDB. Okay, so I know in my mind I don't really have to worry about that one. But the rest of the day seems very standard, right? So what's this? This is the APM. What's this query doing? Another update APM. Selecting a node with no lock, the magic fast button, I guess. And so you can just get an idea of what the workload has been for in a day. You mentioned baseline, right? So this is kind of a baseline for me, maybe for that day, have an idea of what a typical day looks like. But I haven't answered the question yet, is it a problem? So down here, for this particular time slice, if I click on the resources, I can get an idea of some utilization for CPU, some memory information, some disk information as well, to get me an idea of, do I have resource constraints for the server? Would adding disk help this install of Orion? Would adding more memory, would adding more CPU? Now, in most cases for Orion, what do we find? We don't find that Orion installs are bound by memory or CPU usually. Usually it's disk, right? It's the throughput on the disk. We're not really seeing that weight here. Let me show you.
And it also depends on which modules you have. Like NetFlow, it's very write and intensive, right?
Sure.
So, and there's, as you can see from the SAM module, it updates statistics on components a lot, right? So it depends on which modules that you have, and each module, like if you're doing the baselines, lets you see like what is the added weights that are coming across too if you're watching.
So in another view for DPA, I have all these tabs up here, and you can see we're looking at the SQL statement one right now, but if I go over to the weights, I can get an idea of what the weight events are for this particular server, and I can see memory CPU is the most. What this really means is that the server's just busy. Right? It tells us, if I click, I get a description of it. It just says it's typically using CPU or memory. Something is running. So in SQL Server, you get three states. Your request, what we usually call a query, your request will be running, runnable, or suspended. Suspended is when you get these wait events, and it says, well, I'm waiting on CX packet or a write log. Running means it's actually running. Runnable means it's just waiting for a scheduler. So this memory CPU means you're running a runnable. Now, I didn't see a CPU bottleneck, so I don't think there's a CPU issue.
Right.
It looks like it's just simply using the resources available to it and fairly efficiently. We knew those queries were happening in 2 milliseconds. So when I look at this particular instance, I don't come away saying that, hey, we need more hardware. Now is it time to scale up? Scaling up isn't going to help this Orion installation. So if you have a bottleneck, it has to be somewhere else. So now you start asking questions like, well, was there any blocking happening? Well, now look here. So if somebody came to you and they said, I was running a report at 9 a.m. or something, and it ran for like 20 seconds, and I'm kind of annoyed. And so they call you. Now you can look at it and say, well, I could see something else was happening at that moment. You were being blocked. That doesn't mean that you should go order more memory or CPU or something else for this particular installation of Orion. That's not going to solve that particular issue, right?
That's where a lot of the people, especially our Orion administrators, fall short on, right? Because a lot of the times we're accidentally in the DPA position, and so we just know that the Orion platform has to have SQL. And a lot of the times, if things are taking a long time to come across, they're like, oh, I guess I'm just going to throw everything I have at it.
Absolutely, especially if it's a VM, just add more vCPU to it,
well,
and
it's so easy.
It's just so easy. So the last thing I do want to show is let's do this particular query, which is I think the APM one. So what we have for those accidental DBAs is, to me, one of the most powerful charts in all of DPA, the historical charts. We talked about baseline. You have a 30-day window here of what this query has been doing, so you can see what's normal or not. 4 million executions. Why are so many more executions these days than what we had for the 3 weeks previous? And you can go through this to get an idea of what's normal. Remember, you have the question, like, is there a problem? And then the next question is, what can I do about it? Right now, it looks like, well, we have some write log waits. So it's just waiting to write to the log? Maybe. Maybe there's a lot of checkpoints. Maybe it's just a lot of activity, and it's an aggregate amount of write log being shown across millions of executions. Lots of tiny, tiny little executions, and it's writing to the log as much as it can. That doesn't mean that you have a disk issue. It means that you're maybe the most efficient thing on earth right now, and it's just flooding their log, and you don't really have any bottlenecks. So to me, come down here, see, this is my favorite, right? Average wait time per execution. So even at its peak bottleneck, it was 2 milliseconds.
I feel like that's not a great concern.
Right. If you come to me and say, hey, look, you got to cut this in half from 2 milliseconds to 1, how much time do you want to spend on trying to tune that one query? I've known of one entity in the world that has a 1 millisecond response time on their queries. Other than that, 2 is usually good enough for most people. So for Orion here, when I look at this, I don't see any sort of issues whatsoever. So I can rule out. So if somebody comes to me and they say, there's a problem with Orion, we've got to fix it, we've got to make it better, I can use DPA to get an idea and say, you know what? The issue isn't with the Orion database itself or the Orion database server, right? So remember, knowing what the problem isn't is also as powerful as knowing what the problem is.
100% agree. So like the server and application monitor can also help you to identify this, but I really enjoyed how DPA was able to be used to isolate and actually see the specific queries.
Yeah, and once you isolate those queries, you can then think about how to make things a little bit better. Chances are you're not going to be rewriting the code, right? But you will get an idea if you're going to need to scale up or scale out, or maybe even both.
And scaling up means that we buy a bigger box. Scaling out means we deploy more nodes.
Right, so how do we know which one we want?
Well, simple. We need to know if it's time for a second poller.
Okay, and how do we do that?
Well, we need to find out a couple of metrics. One is our current polling completion. The other is our polling rate. We can take those numbers and get an idea if action is needed, either by scaling up or scaling out.
And this is where the information from SAM and Database Performance Analyzer, DPA, are valuable because they help you understand if the performance issues are related to throughput or if it's just a handful of queries causing some blocking or locking, say from somebody that wrote a custom report or a widget.
Exactly. And so let's take a look where all this goodness comes from.
Okay.
Okay, so when we're talking about the polling completion numbers, we're going to go back to that screen that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
So we're going to go into the settings, all settings, and then this time, instead of stopping off at the polling settings, we're going to continue on down and actually go into the polling engines itself.
So that's really below the fold.
It is.
Yeah.
And from here, we can see the exact amount of polling engines of which that you have. So we can see that there's a main Orion. We can then see that there's an additional polling engine that is available to us.
Okay.
Now, you may have several of these, and which just means that you can scroll on down so that you can look at them individually. What we're going to focus on is the actual content within this so that you understand what that actually means. So on here, we can see that this NPM that we have out here, which is the Network Performance Monitor, we can see that it's active. We can see that this is the primary. So this is the brain that's going to be taking in a lot more of the CPU and the utilization of memory that we would see there.
Okay.
It's going to literally be the brain function behind everything that's happening. It's getting the information and saying, okay, all the polling engines, you guys do this stuff, you send it to the database, I'm going to do all the alerting. So that's the one that I always really want to focus on to make sure that people understand. You want to make sure that's healthy and that is running at its peak performance, like we were talking about earlier. When we look here, we can see the exact polling version that it is. You definitely want to make sure that these two are the same. Now, if we look in here and bring this across, we can see that this is at a 99.99 polling actual completion. We can see the elements. So a lot of the times when people are asking about elements, I don't know how many I have 3 devices. Well,
Right.
depending on the product, there's a different way that we will actually license that. So when you look at the Network Performance Monitor, you want to come here and see the element count of which that you have, because you're wanting to then see when do I need to break over and how can I, alleviate kind of the threat, the weight that's on that.
And so for here, the total number is 1133, and then that gets broken down, network volume interface.
Exactly. And then something that I like to really focus in on, because you were using the server application monitor talking about it along with your DPA, is that we will show you the SAM application polling rate. Now, the reason why that makes a difference is because the server and application monitor has different components of which that you can use. So it's using SNMP, it'll use queries that can come across. It can be its own little guru of things that can come through there. You need to know how much of that utilization is being ran. So once you start to go through here and look and you're saying, okay, I have 99.99% to a 100. Once that starts getting to 98 to 97%, if you look into there, that's when you should kind of raise an eyebrow and be like, okay, What is going on? I'm not able to complete those cycles. We were at the beginning here talking about polling settings.
Right.
It's not completing those. So say you have say 10,000 elements on here. What that is getting at is that it's already been through the 120 seconds and it has not yet completed all the 10,000 elements of which that you have on there. That's a problem because now you're getting behind for the next round of 120 seconds that needs to come across there.
But somebody could come here and they could look at the 98, 97 and think, oh my God, I need another polling engine. But the reality is, 2 days ago, they forgot the configuration changes that they made and they adjusted their retention rates, and that's what's really causing the stress and the problem.
Definitely. And so once we go here and we say, all right, now I'm going to get myself an additional poller. From there, what I would like to do is I clear off the elements from here. I'm going to load balance with my polling, my actual pollers. So then I take everything off and I move them over, which you can do from the manage nodes. You're able to, change the polling engine of which that you're being polled on very easily. It's not a hard process. So once I do that, then I get my health back. Now, why that's important is when you talk about the additional polling engines, there's also additional web servers. And a lot of times people don't understand when that comes into play. Right. This is your brain, your actual primary. Your secondary is the ones that's going to start doing your polling. I want to take the IIS resources that are using my CPU and my memory, aka other things that could break, off of my primary. I want to delete that default website. I want to delete that website because I want to add an additional web server somewhere else. So that's the scaling out, right? I'm scaling out because my database is fine. We looked at it, right? It was the 2 milliseconds. We're doing great. What I need to manage the resources of which that I'm trying to monitor across. So I'm scaling out by adding on the additional pollers. I'm allowing the web servers because that way all the website traffic is going over there. That helps me when I'm troubleshooting, right? So when you're troubleshooting these to come across, I now have isolated different silos that have different ways that they're going to handle data. The main is going to do your alerting and you have your services of which it's going to be up. My web server, if I'm having web issues, I'm directing my focus to that web server itself. If I'm having polling issues, I can go to the polling engines themselves and check here, see if one of them is getting lagged behind, see what's going on. I can then look at my baseline because I'm monitoring it, and then I can troubleshoot the polling issues of which that are going across there from that location. Now, what I'd also like to look at is there is a way that you can do specific monitoring, and this is kind of a trick story. So this is an advanced configurations, and this is the server specific information. So I can copy paste this link. You guys can have this. We will put it in the lower thirds as well for you to have the information on. Now, when we look at this, this is server specific. So earlier we were looking at global, which means that you make the change, it goes to all of your polling engines, it goes to everything at once.
Right.
But what if there was other places of which that I needed to just tweak a little bit because I have a poller outside, I have a poller that maybe in a remote office, I have something server specific in which I need to go. Well, that's where the server specific comes in with the advanced configuration mode. Now, you guys probably have seen me before when talking about the ASAs and how we can change some of the information that's here, so little tip of the hat there. So when we're looking at this, we can see up here in the top left, it's talking about all the servers, but then I can specifically change settings to these different polling engines of which that are available to me to change. So I can click into one of these and make a server specific change. So say phase 2, because I'm only looking at my ASAs that are outside or my inside, it depends on however I have it set up with my polling engine, I can change specifically per polling engine how it affects and actually gathers data between them. Now, the cool thing about that is when you're doing that, you can also look at the different Cortex monitorings. You can look at how the real-time policies, when they expire, when things are coming across there. So you literally can have your tweaked little polling engines do multiple different things for you so that you're not having to, tweak your database because of the timeouts. Earlier when we were talking about SNMP timeouts, things of that nature. Well, I can specifically say this one's going to be slower because it has a different media of which that the information's coming through. By doing that, I'm making a change here instead of trying to tweak or try to throw memory. You can't throw memory at throughput, right? Like you can't do that. Like if it's going to take a long time, if it's a satellite connection, if there's things that's going to be coming across there and you need it to be minuscule and you need to make the change, come to this location, make a server specific change and allow that polling engine to be its unique little unicorn of which that we want it to be. The main focus point though is that helps in to allow you to understand that you can have all the information of your pollers that you need server-side specific. Now, something that's really cool that I want to show you is that when you have this stuff, we talk about reporting and alertings, right? Like, you know, how do we know? And a lot of the times the admins tell me, well, I didn't know that the polling engine went offline, or I didn't know that it wasn't updating the database. So let me show you where you can have the alert to be set up for this. Okay, so now I'm in the customer success area, and what I put in here is the scalability engine guideline. By doing this, it'll bring you to this location, and as you can see, it has the SolarWinds Orion products. If you are looking to scale out or scale up, this has great resources for you that are available. Now, the trick is that if you scroll down a little bit, it'll show you these are out-of-the-box alerts that we have designed that are within there. Now, this is my favorite one because this says polling rate limit has exceeded. So when we were just looking at those settings, it said, hey, you know, I'm at 99.9%. It was like 4 milliseconds. It was my last update to the database. What happens when that goes over 2 minutes? Well, we know we're missing polling cycles, right? So this is an actual alert within your alert manager that will look for that, and it'll say, hey, based upon the threshold of which that you have set up, I'm not getting an update through the database. So that helps you to not have that ghost poller. And we've heard about that with many different types of centralized monitoring, because sometimes it may be an update that came out that's not working right. It may be something, you know, a network connection or something that's something that's not making a lot of sense right there. So the best thing that we can do is engage the alerts of which that are within so that they help protect you. So those are kind of my ways to know, like, when you need to scale up, scale out, and a little bit of an alerting to make sure that it has your back.
I really like the advanced screen because, well, I saw all those rows, many, many rows, but it let me quickly visually see if one particular server was not configured the same as the rest.
Definitely.
It just allowed me to kind of, if I had to troubleshoot, if somebody was having these issues, I'd say, well, what's different? That advanced screen lets me have an idea if something is different between those polling engines or not.
Definitely. Okay, for this next section, let's break things down into optimizing tasks internally to the Orion database. Orion does a bunch of work itself. There's no need to have tasks such as index rebuilds configured externally. Orion will do this out of the box, and you can configure the timing of the maintenance.
And that's good to know, so that way you can work with your database administrator to make sure there's no duplication of efforts.
And that's right. And here's what the Orion internal maintenance does for you. It'll clean up the orphan nodes. It will prune, archive, and roll up data according to the retention settings. It will update statistics for tables and indexes, and it will rebuild and reorganize indexes as needed.
So the rebuilding, reorganizing indexes, so that's all standard stuff that any DBA would configure in the maintenance plan. But for Orion, the internal Orion maintenance does some extra stuff too, like cleaning up those orphan nodes. That's why we would have you use, or prefer to have you use, the internal Orion maintenance.
Yes, and because the same place you set the timing for the maintenance to run is also where you configure retention, we've already talked about the role retention plays for performance.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder. So any other tasks we want to share with them?
Next, we'd probably look at the ongoing monitoring of your Orion environment, looking at the logs, searching for errors, and diving into the database to make certain that we are really overloading things.
All right, let's get started.
Okay, so we stay a lot in this screen actually because it's so significant to your installation and it gives you a lot of data. And we're barely scratching the surface actually with all the available information here. So we're going to go back to the settings, all settings page from the top, and we're going to scroll back down. And I wanted to show a little bit of the database details itself, because a lot of times if you accidentally got this, right? And I say accidentally because they're like, hey, take over monitoring, and you're like, I'm not a DBA. Well, this is a great way to kind of get a feel for what you're actually looking at. Yeah. So we can go to the database details, and it'll even tell you where it's located at. It'll tell you the server side that it's on, what versioning that it has, and it tells you the username password. Like, it's the username and the password setup. It's not a Windows account that's going across there. The username itself doesn't tell you the password. And then it tells you things that I like. Connection timeout. The reason why is because obviously as a network and infrastructure, you want to make sure that it's allotted time for where you're going. And sometimes people get stuck with things that are on less than efficient, infrastructure.
Shocking.
Shocking, I know. But the main point is that once you get that feel for the network and understand how things are going, if you need to increase that and tell you that you can, come back to it and actually, make it right, you can do that in your database settings that we'll go to. But this gives you an overall health element of what's going on with your database server itself. And it'll show you the last database archive, so that's great information to know, because if it's not archiving or doing something, we probably need to check in that location. Right. And it also tells you when the next one's scheduled, so then you know, like, okay, is there a weekly schedule, is it daily? If you're using the Orion maintenance, which you should be doing, it will actually be every night. Should be. So that will let you know if it's scheduling or if there's a scheduling issue, because sometimes you'll see it in its previous days because there may be a scheduling issue that's happening on the Windows Task Scheduler itself. Then this is where I really like those retention settings. So this shows you specifically 7 days detailed, then it rolls up to your 15 days, then the 30 for the daily containers. This gives you that retention so that we know that, when we're talking about performance and database size for how they come across. So now we're going to go back into the settings page and we're going to go into the polling settings that we were earlier, because that makes sense for your database settings,
totally.
Right? And so once we go into here, this is where we're going to be able to check to make sure it's doing the re-indexing, it's doing the information of which that it should do. So I'm going to scroll past the polling intervals that we started with today, and we're going to go into this huge list of database settings, right? So from this, if you were new to come in here, you automatically know the exact time of which the archives are taking place. So when that is happening, it's at 2:15 a.m. Something that I would like to suggest is if you have like Network Configuration Manager, your NCM, those have jobs that can be scheduled, and those can actually take up bandwidth because they're going out to devices and they're pulling configs and they're doing things. A lot of times people plan these for like 12, 1 o'clock. Depending on the size and how many, sometimes that can take a little bit longer and you'll actually go on top of your database maintenance. We kind of want the database maintenance to be by itself. You want it to focus on its job at hand. Not because SQL can't handle it, but let's just let it be able to breathe and do what it needs to do without trying to read and write everything at the same time.
And I would just point out, this is critical to talk to the database administrators about this, because they probably have default backups, statistic updates, index rebuilds happening. You really want to make sure that you're not having Orion do a workload against a database server that they aren't expecting at the time when they're trying to do maintenance for some other databases.
Yeah, no, I have to definitely agree with you that. And then a lot of times we'll have people that'll run NetFlow reports, which are huge queries to the database. And sometimes I've seen where people accidentally have set this up when they went into here and changed it to PM instead of AM. And that has caused havoc because usually in that 2 PM range, there's a lot of traffic that's going on and NetFlow as well. So you can run into some slowness that's happening there. Now here's where you change those retention settings from that database details that I was showing you. Okay. When you guys come here, this is where I want you guys to look at your security policies and your policies of which that you have within your actual organization, because you're not going to be able to match those if you're not checking your settings. So this is set up for 365. You have your 7 days detailed. You need to go with those policies. You need to compare them here and make yourself accurate against that, because you do not want to be told by somebody higher up, I need information that's 2 years ago when you only have 365 days worth of data. That's not going to be appropriate, and you're going to be out of compliance, and it's not going to be looking good on you when you cannot provide that information.
Right.
And when we're talking about being able to have the retention, that's where you come into backups too. Like, I mean, if your backup is not tested and it's not a true backup and you can't actually go back to it, that's a problem. So you're not able to grab that information. So that's things of which that we need to think about. So when we're here, we're able to see all the retention settings of which that we can do. And then from here, we can make any of the changes and it's instant. So it'll happen that night of which that comes across. So how would I know if I come in here that, hey, I want to make sure that the maintenance is running successfully and there's no problems?
Well, I think it would be great if somehow there was some type of a log file for the maintenance.
And there is. So we're going to go into and look at the SW debug maintenance log. From here, it tells you a lot of great information because it'll tell you that everything is rolling up correctly that matches your retention settings, as well as is there any errors that was perceived. And what I love about it is that it'll tell you how much time it took. So then you know if you can plan things after it. So let me show you how you get there by going into the server itself. All right, now that I'm actually remoted into the box itself, I'm going to go to my local disk. I'm going to go into program data, which if you do not see it, you can check the hidden icons.
And this is the server that Orion is installed on. Yes, okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into the program data itself. I'm going to go into SolarWinds. Then I'm going to go into the logs, and then I'm going to choose Orion. A lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah,
and then
a lot of log files. Log all the things.
And then I'm going to hit SW to go into so I can find the SW debug maintenance log itself.
There it is.
It's a text file. I want to open this up. Now, the plethora of information that's in here, you can literally go through the woods on. But this is showing you, just as we were showing on the details, all of the retaining and how it's going across here. It's rolling the data and it's rolling everything up. That's how you know that it's functioning correctly. Now, we can scroll all the way down here. As you can see, it takes quite a long time, but it goes through everything of which that it's doing, right? It's removing things, it's doing the orphans, it's going everything
and again,
through here.
And this is why we would tell you, have the DBAs, don't bother with the maintenance for Orion, let us do it ourselves, because we're doing more than just stats, right? We're doing a lot of data retention policies, and we're applying a lot of business logic, right, for this database.
And from here, we're able to see that it's doing the fragmentation too. So,
yes.
And that's something that's great that you can come across there, because a lot of times what I have seen as an application engineer was that some of these would not complete. The fragmentation was so big, it would not actually come through there. And so you would just see these errors that would just start coming across here because it wasn't able to finish or to do anything across there. Now, we're able to come down through here and see, okay, it's actually doing everything, and it tells you the before as well as after the defragmentation, and then it starts saying, okay, I'm checking the indexes, it's complete, now my database maintenance is complete. From this location, there's a couple of things. One, I don't see a whole bunch of errors at the bottom, which is great. If I did, I would then want to further investigate what's going on there. Two, I'm able to see that at 2:16 and 22 after, I was able to have my database complete. From the previous screen, we've seen that was actually 2:15 when it started.
Okay then.
So it's taken, what, almost a minute and a half-ish.
Yeah. A minute and a
to
half.
complete the full maintenance. This is a very small installation, so don't try to compare it because everybody's unique, little snowflakes. But from here, between here, it helps me to know that from this moment on, I can schedule out probably 15 minutes later and say, now I can do like maybe some of the NCM jobs that I was talking about, or maybe I have scheduled reporting that needs to go out, things like that. But now I know I'm not going to cross over into this information. Now, when we talk about fragmentation, I don't think people quite understand like why that makes such a big deal. You being the data guy, why do you think fragmentation and actually defragmenting tables is such a great thing for us to do?
Well, so the fragmentation is really, there's two types, there's internal or external. So let's just call the external fragmentation, say, finding, a spot on the disk, page on a disk somewhere. So if index or a table is externally fragmented, then it has to go out to many different places on the disk in order to pull back information. Internal fragmentation are things usually caused by page splits. So that's just where you used to be able to write to a page, but you put too much data, and then 2 pages had to be created. Now you got data in 2 different spots. They could be right near each other on disk, but you still have to do 2 I/O calls now in order to get the data in there. So that is something that you can clean up by either rebuilding or reorganizing your indexes. So that's why it's fairly important, because it can and usually does lead to better performance. A lot of it can depend upon data access patterns, but the way Orion works, you want to keep stuff at low fragmentation, and that's the best way because there are times when you want things fragmented and scattered. That's how Flash works. Mm-hmm. It goes everywhere, but that's not necessarily the best thing for databases. But for Orion, we want things kind of contiguous as much as possible.
I appreciate that, because a lot of the time some of the guys on Thwack as well, they're like, well, I just don't understand why I need the defragmentation. So now you've heard it.
So optimizing Orion doesn't have to be such a headache.
No, especially not if you stay on top of things through proactive monitoring.
Oh, and using other SolarWinds tools to help you be proactive too.
Right, and now that you know what to look for and how to build your own alerts and reports, you have all the tools necessary to keep Orion running at optimal levels.
For ThWAC Camp, I'm Thomas LaRock.
And I'm Destiny Bertucci. See you next time.